When a military funeral becomes a battlefield, and a police badge transforms into a weapon of hate, justice must answer. Today I'm bringing you the story that shook an entire nation to its core. The moment when Sergeant Derek Langston, a decorated police officer with 15 years of service, pointed his gun at General Amara Monroe, the first black woman to achieve her rank in the state's National Guard, during a military funeral. Breaking news tonight as Officer Derek Langston has been sentenced to life in prison after threatening a high-ranking military official during a funeral procession. This isn't just another headline. This is where America's promise of equality collided with the harsh reality faced by Black Americans every day. This is where one man's prejudice met the full force of justice in a way rarely seen in our courts. The morning began with honor and respect. A community gathered to mourn Colonel Mason Darnell, a decorated officer known for his commitment to justice and equality, his casket draped in the American flag. His family is seeking closure, his brothers and sisters in uniform standing at attention. Yet within hours, that sacred ceremony would become evidence in a criminal investigation that would eventually lead to something almost unheard of in American jurisprudence. A police officer sentenced to life in prison for an act of racism. How did we get here? What does it mean when those sworn to protect become the threat? And why did this case, unlike so many others, end with actual accountability? Before we continue, I want you to reflect for a moment. Have you ever been judged based solely on the color of your skin? Have you witnessed someone being treated differently because of how they look? The moment when General Monroe faced down the barrel of Sergeant Langston's gun wasn't isolated. It was connected to centuries of systemic discrimination that continues to this day. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and they help us understand the true scope of this issue. Let's go back to that autumn morning in Ashford. The sun filtered through stained glass windows as mourners gathered at St. Augustine's Chapel. The air is heavy with grief and the quiet dignity of military protocol. No one could have predicted that this day of remembrance would become a turning point in America's ongoing struggle with racial justice. St. Augustine's Chapel stood as a monument to both faith and history in Ashford. Its stone walls, weathered by over a century of prayers, celebrations, and farewells, rose against the autumn sky. Inside, golden light streamed through stained glass windows, casting multicolored reflections across polished wooden pews and marble floors. The chapel had witnessed generations of joy and grief, but few ceremonies matched the solemnity of Colonel Mason Darnell's funeral. The front rows held a sea of crisp uniforms and glistening medals. Military personnel from every branch sat straight-backed, their faces composed despite the weight of loss. Behind them, community members filled every available space. Teachers who remembered Darnell's school visits, young activists inspired by his advocacy, elderly residents who'd watched him grow from a determined young man into a respected leader. At the center of this gathering stood General Amara Monroe. Her dark uniform contrasted with the silver stars signifying her hard-earned rank. Monroe had broken barriers throughout her 30-year military career, becoming the first black woman general in the state's National Guard. Her journey hadn't been easy. Each promotion came with resistance, each achievement questioned by those who couldn't see beyond the color of her skin. Yet there she stood, her posture military perfect, her expression revealing nothing of the battles fought beyond the battlefield. Those who knew her understood that Monroe's calm exterior masked a fierce commitment to equality, a commitment she shared with the man they gathered to honor. Colonel Mason Darnell's legacy extended far beyond his military accomplishments. Born in Ashford, when drinking fountains were still segregated, he rose through military ranks with exceptional skill and unwavering integrity. After 3 tours overseas, he returned home to fight a different war, the ongoing struggle for equality in his hometown. Darnell established mentorship programs for minority youth, pressed for police accountability reforms, and built bridges between communities that had lived separate lives for generations. His marriage to Reverend Ruth Darnell, who now led his funeral service, created a powerful partnership that challenged Ashford's deep-rooted divisions. Ashford's history mirrored America's complicated relationship with race. Founded as a military outpost in the 1800s, the town grew into a community where opportunity and oppression existed side by side. Black soldiers who fought for freedom abroad returned to find restricted neighborhoods and limited justice at home. Over decades, progress came in painful increments. Schools integrated after bitter fights. The police force hired its first black officer in 1975, amid protests and threats. The military base outside town often stood as an island of relative equality in a sea of resistance. The chapel held this complex history within its walls as Reverend Ruth Darnell approached the pulpit. Her voice, steady despite her grief, filled the sacred space. Mason believed that uniform color mattered more than skin color, she said, her words resonating through the silent chapel. He understood that true patriotism means fighting for the America we promised to be, not just the America that is. Tears streamed down faces young and old. A retired general clutched his handkerchief. A teenage cadet stared ahead, absorbing the weight of the moment. An elderly woman who had marched alongside Darnell decades earlier closed her eyes in prayer. Each person present carried their own connection to the man in the flag-draped casket, and their own relationship with Ashford's divided past. For some, Colonel Darnell represented hope that change was possible. For others, he served as a conscience, challenging comfortable silences about ongoing inequality. General Monroe maintained her composure, but those nearby noticed her hand tighten slightly when Reverend Darnell spoke of her husband's final wish: to see Ashford become a place where dignity isn't determined by demographics. None of the mourners could have known that within hours, that wish would be tested in ways that would force an entire nation to confront uncomfortable truths about justice, respect, and the distance between America's ideals and its reality. The funeral procession emerged from St. Augustine's Chapel like a solemn river flowing through the streets of Ashford. First came the police motorcade, lights flashing silently out of respect. Then the hearse bearing Colonel Darnell's casket, followed by the lead car carrying General Monroe and Reverend Ruth Darnell. Behind them stretched a line of vehicles that seemed to represent every facet of the community. Along the route, citizens stood in respectful silence. Store owners paused their business to place hands over hearts. School children held small American flags. Veterans rendered crisp salutes. For these brief moments, Ashford appeared united in grief and recognition. A glimpse of the community Colonel Darnell had worked to build. The procession moved at a deliberate pace toward Ashford Military Cemetery, where generations of service members had been laid to rest. American flags marked each grave, standing as silent sentinels of sacrifice. The cemetery gates, normally closed, stood wide open in welcome. At Ashford Police Department headquarters that same morning, Sergeant Derek Langston strapped on his duty belt with practiced efficiency. 15 years on the force had turned the routine into muscle memory. Badge, radio, handcuffs, firearms. At 43, Langston's once youthful features had hardened into permanent lines of suspicion. His colleagues noted how rarely he smiled, how quick he was to assume the worst, especially in certain neighborhoods. 3 complaints of excessive force had been filed against him, all dismissed. 2 came from black citizens who claimed harassment during routine traffic stops. Funeral detail today, announced the shift supervisor. Colonel Darnell's service. Big military presence expected. I need everyone on their best behavior. Langston didn't bother hiding his scoff. Another circus for a so-called community leader, he muttered to his partner, Officer Paulson. All these resources for one man. Paulson shifted uncomfortably. Darnell was respected, decorated combat veteran, did a lot of good work after he came home. Good work? You mean stirring up trouble. Always complaining about the police. Langston checked his weapon with unnecessary force. Now his wife carries on and General Monroe, acting like she owns the place. Positioned at an intersection along the route, Langston watched the procession through narrowed eyes. His patrol car idled at the curb, dashboard camera recording the passing vehicles. When General Monroe's car approached, his gaze locked onto her profile through the window. Something hardened in his expression, a mixture of resentment and determination. To him, Monroe represented everything wrong with the system: unearned promotion, special treatment, constant demands for change. People like her made his job harder, made officers hesitate when they should act decisively. Charlie 14 to dispatch, Langston spoke into his radio. I'm heading to the cemetery entrance. Something doesn't look right about this procession. Copy Charlie 14, came the confused reply. What specifically are you concerned about? Langston's response came after a beat too long. Just need to verify credentials on some of these vehicles, military protocol and all that. In the passenger seat, Officer Paulson studied his partner with growing concern. 15 years together meant he recognized the signs, the tightened jaw, the drumming fingers, the unnecessary call. Derek, it's a funeral, he said quietly. Let's just give them space. Langston ignored him, pulling the patrol car away from the curb to follow the procession. At the cemetery gates, honor guards stood at attention, rifles ready for the ceremonial salute. The hearse passed through first, followed by General Monroe's vehicle. As the procession slowed to navigate the narrow entrance, Langston accelerated, cutting around several cars and positioning his patrol vehicle at an angle that partially blocked the path. Inside the lead car, General Monroe noticed the patrol vehicle's aggressive maneuver. Her expression remained unchanged, but her posture subtly shifted, the instinctive readiness of someone who had faced conflict before. Langston stepped out, adjusting his belt with deliberate slowness. Each movement projected authority and challenge. Mourners watched in confusion as he approached General Monroe's vehicle, hand resting near his holster. From one angle, an officer performing his duty. From another, an armed man interrupting a sacred ceremony. From yet another, the inevitable collision of two Americas that had existed side by side for too long. Step out of the vehicle, ma'am, Langston called, voice carrying across the suddenly silent cemetery grounds. His hand moved from his belt to rest openly on his holstered weapon, a gesture that sent a ripple of discomfort through the watching crowd. The door to General Monroe's car opened slowly, deliberately. The confrontation that would change Ashford forever was about to begin. General Amara Monroe stepped from the car with measured grace, her uniform immaculate, her expression composed. The cemetery fell silent as she faced Sergeant Langston. The funeral procession behind them had ground to a halt, a frozen tableau of shock and disbelief. Is there a problem, officer? General Monroe asked, her voice calm, yet carrying the natural authority of her rank. Langston's stance widened, his hand still resting on his holstered weapon. I need to see some identification. We've received reports of unauthorized vehicles in this procession. Reverend Ruth Darnell emerged from the other side of the vehicle, grief momentarily overtaken by confusion. Officer, this is my husband's funeral. These are all authorized mourners. Langston barely glanced at the widow. His attention remained fixed on General Monroe, his eyes tracking her every movement. Ma'am, I wasn't speaking to you. I need to see the general's credentials. Now. Murmurs rippled through the gathered mourners. Veterans exchanged glances of disbelief. Families pulled children closer. The honor guard, still at attention, maintained their discipline despite the growing tension. With deliberate slowness, General Monroe reached inside her uniform jacket. I'm retrieving my military ID, officer, she stated clearly, her movements precise and non-threatening. She extended her credentials, military ID prominently displayed alongside her civilian driver's license. Langston snatched them, examining the documents with obvious skepticism. These could be fake, he declared loudly, looking up from the IDs to meet her gaze. How do I know you're really who you claim to be? Officer Paulson approached cautiously, concern evident on his face. Derek, these look legitimate to me. This is clearly a military funeral. Stay out of this, Paulson, Langston snapped. You know how easy it is to get fake IDs these days. And why would a real general be here in Ashford anyway? General Monroe's expression remained unchanged, though something flickered in her eyes. Not fear, but recognition of a situation she had faced in different forms throughout her career. Sergeant Langston, she said, reading his nameplate, I am General Amara Monroe of the National Guard. I am here to honor Colonel Mason Darnell, a decorated officer and dear friend. Your interruption of this solemn ceremony is both unprofessional and disrespectful. 23-year-old Malik Turner stood among the mourners, witnessing the escalating confrontation. Unlike others frozen in shock, he pulled out his phone and began recording. His hands trembled slightly, but he held the camera steady, documenting what his instincts told him was dangerously wrong. "Put those away and step back toward your vehicle," Langston ordered, returning the IDs with a dismissive flick. "I need to verify these with headquarters." "Officer, we are in the middle of a funeral procession," General Monroe replied, her voice firm but controlled. "Colonel Darnell deserves our respect. I suggest you contact your superior officer if you have concerns." Langston's face flushed with anger. "Are you refusing a direct order?" "I am attempting to proceed with a military funeral," she countered. "There are protocols." "Protocols?" Langston cut her off, voice rising. "You people always talk about protocols when it suits you. I'm the authority here." The shift was subtle at first, fingers tightening, palm adjusting grip. Then in one fluid motion, Langston upholstered his weapon. He didn't point it directly at General Monroe, but held it at the ready position, a clear escalation that sent shockwaves through the cemetery. "I said step back," he demanded, voice sharp with command. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Several mourners pulled out phones. Veterans instinctively moved forward, then hesitated. Confronting an armed officer could make things worse. The honor guard remained frozen in position, trapped between military discipline and the impulse to protect their general. General Monroe didn't flinch. Decades of military service had prepared her for crisis situations. She kept her hands visible, her voice steady. "Officer, you're brandishing a weapon at a funeral with children present. I strongly suggest you holster your firearm and we discuss this professionally." "He's got a gun," Malik called out, his voice breaking through the tension. "Everyone's seeing this, right? He pulled a gun at a funeral." His phone captured everything. Langston's aggressive stance, General Monroe's calm dignity, the shocked faces of mourners. The digital record would soon become evidence in a case that would capture national attention. Return to confrontation with Officer Paulson moving forward. "Derek, put the gun down," Officer Paulson urged, stepping between his partner and General Monroe. "This isn't protocol. This isn't right." Langston's eyes darted between Paulson and Monroe. "Get out of my way. She's not complying with orders." "There's nothing to comply with," Paulson insisted, voice rising. "She showed ID. This is a funeral. We need to back off. Now." For a moment Langston seemed to waver, the reality of his actions beginning to penetrate his anger. But rather than retreat, he raised his weapon higher, pointing it directly at General Monroe. "Last warning," he shouted. At that moment the honor guard captain made a split-second decision. He gave the signal, and the ceremonial rifles fired their blank salute, the timing altered to create a distraction. Sequence of rapid cuts showing the chaos. The crack of rifles. Langston startled, weapon wavering. Officer Paulson lunged forward, mourners dropping to the ground. General Monroe standing unmoved. Malik Turner continues to record. Officer Paulson tackled his partner from behind, sending both men to the ground. Langston's weapon discharged harmlessly into the air as they fell. Other officers rushed forward, securing the weapon and restraining Langston, who fought against them, shouting accusations and threats. Through it all, General Monroe remained standing, her posture straight, her expression resolute. Only those closest to her could see the slight tremor in her hands, not from fear, but from controlled anger at the desecration of what should have been a sacred moment. What would you have done in General Monroe's position? Would you have maintained that level of composure when facing an armed threat? Or would your reaction have been different? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Her restraint in this moment would become central to what happened next. Breaking news tonight as shocking footage emerges from a military funeral in Ashford. The video, which has now been viewed over 10 million times, shows a police officer drawing his weapon on a decorated general. Questions about racial bias in policing have once again come to the forefront after yesterday's incident. Within hours of the confrontation, Malik Turner's video had spread across every social media platform. The footage, unedited and undeniable, showed the full exchange, from General Monroe's composed responses to Langston's escalating aggression. News helicopters hovered over Ashford, broadcasting live as protesters gathered outside police headquarters. The Ashford police chief stood before a wall of microphones, visibly uncomfortable. "Sergeant Langston has been suspended pending investigation. His actions do not reflect the values of our department," We are cooperating fully with state authorities who have taken over the case. Behind him, city officials shifted nervously, aware that standard statements and promised investigations would not be enough this time. The evidence was too clear, the symbolism too powerful. An armed white officer threatening a black general at a funeral meant to honor service and sacrifice. Online, the video sparked immediate outrage. Hashtags multiplied: Justice for Monroe, police accountability, and most prominently, Pastor Honor Not Hate, a phrase taken directly from Colonel Darnell's own writings about equality. The footage played in an endless loop, each viewing adding fuel to demands for accountability. 3 days after the incident, General Monroe held her first press conference. Standing tall in her uniform, she addressed the swarm of reporters with the same composure she had shown at the cemetery. "What happened to me was not unique," she stated, her voice steady. "The only unusual aspect was that it happened to someone with my rank, at a military funeral, with cameras recording. For countless Americans, this treatment comes without witnesses or justice." Her words resonated across the country. Military leaders, celebrities, and politicians shared her statement. Veterans groups issued condemnations of Langston's actions. Military families started wearing Honor Not Hate pins alongside their service insignia. At her church, Reverend Ruth Darnell transformed grief into action. "My husband fought for a country where uniform color matters more than skin color," she told her congregation, which now overflowed with community members seeking solace and purpose. "We will continue his fight." The church became command central for a rapidly growing movement. Volunteers coordinated legal observers, community education programs, and police accountability initiatives. What began as mourning evolved into mobilization. The protests grew larger each day. Unlike previous demonstrations that had divided Ashford, these gatherings drew participants from every neighborhood. Retired military personnel stood alongside young activists. White community members joined black neighbors in demanding change. Signs bearing General Monroe's image appeared alongside Colonel Darnell's. T-shirts with the phrase, "I need to see some identification," became symbols of resistance against profiling. But unlike movements born in anger alone, this one carried the disciplined dignity that Monroe had displayed. In community centers across Ashford, residents gathered to share their experiences with police. Parents described teaching children survival tactics for traffic stops. Veterans recounted returning home in uniform only to face suspicion. Young professionals detailed being followed in stores. For many white residents, these stories provided their first real glimpse into their neighbors' daily reality. General Monroe, though initially reluctant to become the face of a movement, embraced her unexpected role with characteristic resolve. She established clear principles: peaceful protest, specific demands for reform, and accountability without demonization of all police. "This movement isn't against law enforcement," she explained to a packed auditorium. "It's for justice. It's for consistency. It's for an America where respect is the default, not the exception." What began in Ashford soon spread to cities nationwide. The Honor Not Hate hashtag became a rallying cry for policy changes at local and state levels. Military bases held discussions about racial equality. Police departments faced unprecedented pressure to examine their training and accountability measures. A billboard appeared near the Ashford city limits featuring a simple message: "Honor all who serve, in uniform and in community." The image showed the diverse faces of Ashford residents, alongside General Monroe's quote, "True respect doesn't depend on rank or race." As public pressure mounted, attention turned to the justice system. Would Sergeant Langston face real consequences, or would this case follow the familiar pattern of administrative leave followed by quiet reinstatement? The answer would surprise a nation accustomed to disappointment. The Ashford County Courthouse had never seen such activity. News vans lined the streets. Protesters with Honor Not Hate signs stood in organized rows. Police barricades created a narrow path for those entering the imposing stone building. 2 weeks after the incident, State Attorney James Mercer announced the charges against Sergeant Derek Langston. His voice echoed through the packed press room. "After thorough investigation, we are charging Sergeant Langston with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, civil rights violations, misconduct in office, and attempted second-degree murder." The charges sent shockwaves through various communities. Police unions issued statements of concern about rush to judgment. Civil rights organizations cautioned against premature celebration. Legal experts debate the strength of each charge on endless news cycles. The legal process moved with unusual speed. Judge Elaine Washington, known for her no-nonsense approach, denied bail due to the egregious nature of threatening a military officer during a funeral service and evidence suggesting Langston might flee the jurisdiction. Prosecution and defense attorneys battled over evidence admissibility. Malik Turner's video became central, unedited, clearly showing the entire encounter from multiple angles as other mourners' footage emerged. Body camera footage from Officer Paulson provided additional perspective, including Langston's comments before approaching General Monroe. When the trial began 3 months later, the courthouse overflowed with observers. Reporters sketched the scene, as cameras weren't permitted in the courtroom. The prosecution's opening statement was direct. This case is about abuse of power in its most blatant form. Sergeant Langston didn't see a general that day. He didn't see a mourner. He saw only the color of General Monroe's skin, and he responded with deadly force. General Monroe arrived each day in full uniform, walking through the gauntlet of cameras with the same composure she'd shown during the confrontation. She neither acknowledged protesters supporting her, nor responded to occasional hecklers questioning her account. On the third day, General Monroe took the stand. Her testimony, delivered with military precision, recounted each moment without embellishment. Sergeant Langston approached our vehicle and immediately demanded identification. When presented with valid military credentials, he dismissed them as potentially fake. When reminded of the funeral context, he escalated by drawing his weapon. At no point did I pose any threat that would justify such action. Under cross-examination, the defense attorney attempted to suggest Monroe had been confrontational or resistant to lawful orders. Her responses remained measured. I responded as any officer would, by identifying myself properly, maintaining composure, and attempting to de-escalate the situation. If that's considered confrontational, then the standard for compliance has become complete submission regardless of lawful rights. Langston's defense strategy evolved over the trial. Initially, they claimed he had received reports of security threats to the funeral, a claim demolished when dispatch recordings revealed no such reports. They pivoted to arguing he felt threatened by the military presence, undermined by his recorded comments to Officer Paulson before the confrontation. When Langston finally testified, his demeanor shifted between defiance and attempted justification. I was doing my job. The situation didn't feel right. With all the anti-police sentiment these days, I needed to maintain control of the scene. The prosecutor's cross-examination proved devastating. Did General Monroe make any threatening movements? Not exactly, but did she refuse to provide identification? She showed ID, but I couldn't verify. Was there any emergency that required interrupting a military funeral? I was being proactive about. Just answer the question, Sergeant Langston. Was there an emergency? No. After 7 days of testimony, the jury received the case. They deliberated for just 4 hours before reaching their verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the jury foreman stood. On the count of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of civil rights violations, guilty. On misconduct in office, guilty. On attempted second-degree murder. A pause that seemed to stretch forever. Guilty. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Officer Paulson closed his eyes. Reverend Darnell reached for her neighbor's hand. General Monroe remained still, her expression unchanged. 2 weeks later, Judge Washington delivered her sentence. Her voice cut through the tense courtroom. Mr. Langston, you violated your oath to protect and serve. You abused your authority in the most sacred of settings. You threatened the life of a decorated military leader without provocation or justification. Your actions were motivated by bias rather than duty. She paused, looking directly at the former officer. I sentence you to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years. The sentence, unprecedented in cases involving police misconduct, sparked immediate reaction. Legal experts called it historic and a potential turning point. Police organizations expressed shock at the severity. Civil rights leaders cautiously celebrated while noting how rare such accountability remained. The question echoing across America: was justice truly served? Did this sentence represent appropriate accountability, or was it an exception that proves the rule? What do you think? Is this the beginning of a new era of police accountability, or an outlier that will change nothing? Share your thoughts below. Does this sentence restore your faith in the justice system? As Ashford processed the verdict, attention turned to what would happen next. Would this case lead to lasting change, or would momentum fade once the cameras departed? The answer would lie in what General Monroe and the community chose to do with this unexpected moment. 6 months after the verdict, the Ashford Police Department looked dramatically different. Chief Williams retired, replaced by Maria Hernandez, the department's first woman of color to hold the position. Her first official act, implementing a comprehensive reform package named the Monroe Accountability Initiative. Inside the police academy, new training modules focused on bias recognition and de-escalation. Body cameras became mandatory, with footage reviewed weekly by a civilian oversight board. The department's use of force policy underwent complete revision, with clear consequences for violations. "We're rebuilding this department from the ground up," Chief Hernandez told reporters during a facility tour. Every officer now undergoes monthly cultural competency training and quarterly crisis intervention refreshers. What happened at that funeral will never happen again, not on my watch. General Monroe could have returned to her military duties and left Ashford behind. Instead, she established the Monroe Institute for Community Justice, converting a vacant downtown building into a hub for education and advocacy. "Real change happens when we build bridges between law enforcement and communities," Monroe explained, standing before a classroom of teenagers and police cadets engaged in a dialogue program. Both sides need to see each other's humanity. The Institute launched initiatives ranging from Know Your Rights workshops to police community athletic leagues. Most innovative was the Witness program, which trained citizens to document police interactions safely and effectively, inspired by Malik Turner's quick thinking during the cemetery confrontation. Turner himself, now employed by the Institute, taught documentation techniques to high school students. "Your phone isn't just for social media," he told them. "It's a tool for accountability. But remember, safety first, then footage." The ripple effects spread far beyond Ashford. Police departments nationwide faced unprecedented scrutiny as citizens cited the Langston Standard, demanding similar accountability for misconduct. Law enforcement agencies implemented new policies and training programs, often inviting General Monroe to consult. In Washington, Monroe testified before Congress about police reform. Her military background gave her words unique weight with lawmakers across the political spectrum. Accountability isn't anti-police, it's pro-justice. In the military, we understand that chain of command comes with chain of responsibility. When we fail to hold officers accountable, we undermine public trust in the entire institution. At a national conference of police chiefs, reform became the central theme. Presentations highlighted departments that had successfully implemented accountability measures without compromising public safety. Ashford's model appeared in case studies and training materials. "We've seen complaints against officers drop 60% since implementing these reforms," Chief Hernandez reported to her colleagues. And contrary to fears, our crime clearance rates have improved. Better community relations mean more cooperation with investigations. On the first anniversary of Colonel Darnell's funeral, Ashford gathered again at the military cemetery. This time, the atmosphere blended commemoration with celebration of progress. Honor guards stood at attention. Community members placed flowers. General Monroe and Reverend Darnell unveiled a new memorial stone. The inscription read, "In memory of Colonel Mason Darnell, whose life and legacy inspired change. May we always choose honor over hate." This remembrance evolved into an annual tradition. Each year, new cadets from the police academy and military base participated alongside community members. The ceremony concluded with attendees linking arms, uniform and civilian, young and old, across all demographics, to form a human chain around the cemetery. In schools across America, the Langston case became required study in civics classes. Students analyzed the video, debated police powers, and discussed the balance between authority and accountability. The confrontation that began as a tragedy transformed into a teaching tool for future generations. At the Monroe Institute, a wall displayed framed newspaper headlines chronicling the case and its aftermath. Beside them hung a simple plaque with General Monroe's most quoted statement: "Justice isn't measured by one verdict, but by the systems we build to prevent the need for such verdicts in the future." The story of Ashford continues to evolve. Police departments implement new training, communities develop oversight mechanisms. Military and law enforcement find new ways to honor their shared values while acknowledging their different roles. The question remains, is this lasting change or a momentary response to one dramatic case? The answer may depend on whether we continue to demand accountability when cameras aren't recording and headlines have moved on. As General Monroe often reminds visitors to the Institute, the most important reforms happen not in courtrooms or legislatures, but in the daily interactions between officers and citizens. True change occurs when respect becomes reflex rather than requirement. Dawn broke over Ashford Military Cemetery, painting the sky in gentle orange and gold. General Amara Monroe stood alone before Colonel Darnell's headstone, now weathered by seasons of sun and rain. She adjusted her uniform jacket and placed a single white rose beside the permanent arrangement of flags. "We've come a long way, Mason," she said softly. "Not far enough, but forward nonetheless." In the 2 years since that fateful confrontation, much had changed in Ashford and beyond. Yet General Monroe harbored no illusions about the work that remained. For every reform department, others resisted change. For every officer who embraced accountability, others clung to old patterns. The verdict against Langston hadn't ended systemic racism, it had merely confirmed its existence. The hardest battles, Monroe continued, speaking to the headstone but addressing a larger audience, aren't fought with weapons but with persistence. Change comes not from a single verdict, but from millions of daily choices to recognize each other's humanity. She touched the cool stone, a gesture of respect and resolve. "Your legacy lives in every officer who chooses restraint over reaction, in every citizen who stands witness to injustice, in every leader who demands better from our institutions." As Monroe walked the path toward the cemetery gates, she passed rows of markers, each representing someone who had served a cause greater than themselves. The morning light caught her medals, symbols of a career dedicated to protecting American ideals, sometimes from Americans themselves. The struggle for equality didn't end with one officer's conviction. It continues in police academies and courtrooms, in community centers and Capitol buildings, in everyday interactions between citizens and those sworn to protect them. Real change requires our vigilance, our voice, and our unwavering commitment to justice. It demands that we see each other not through the lens of bias, but through the clarity of our common humanity. If this story moved you, share it. If it challenges you, discuss it. If it inspired you, act on that inspiration. Because in the end, justice isn't just served in courtrooms, it's built in communities, one interaction at a time. Honor, not hate. Accountability, not immunity. Progress, not perfection. These remain our guideposts on the continuing journey toward the America we've promised to be.